This is Greg Pasternak from Riverside Life. Today I'm on Arroyo Grande Creek in Arroyo Grande, California, and this stream is a confined gravel cobble according to both the statewide and regional classifications. I'm still in the South Central Coast region here today, but in terms of the morphological undulations, the statewide classification has this as a pool riffle, so bed undulation, and the regional classification has this as uniform. Numerically, the site has more bed undulation than width undulation by a significant amount, and so part of why I'm here today is to assess what I think about that difference between the two classifications. But Arroyo Grande Creek, where I am, is in a relatively urban, suburban kind of setting. It's not an urban core the way San Luis Obispo Creek was, at least where I am. It's more of a suburban kind of setting, but the channel is deeply incised. This is, let's see, where am I? Over there, right. If you look at where the valley floor is, and then you come down to where the channel is, this height difference in the channel setting is what we call entrenchment. Compared, if you look at the typical depth of the river for the geometric channel of the river compared to the typical depth of this entire entrenched, zone here, that's a big difference. So the river has incised down into this. This is very common in suburban and urban settings, and it makes our ability to ask the question of what is a natural river on a valley floor like in the state of California? And that's not just California, that's pretty much a worldwide problem. But in any case, one of the interesting things is that on the valley floor, we are in something sort of transitioning between unconfined and partially confined valley. And what I mean by that is there tends to be rolling hills close by. And so as a result of that, even the valley floor is narrower than you might expect, but really what's affecting this channel is the fact that it's so deeply entrenched. And entrenchment is not currently part of our classification system for California because we don't have high enough resolution data with the topography of all rivers in California to include that entrenchment concept, but clearly you can see it's very important to consider. Okay, so with that valley context, we now come into the channel, and it's functioning as a confined, so you can see why it would be considered confined within that entrenchment context anyway. The substrate here is predominantly gravel. It has some small cobbles in it. If you look, where you're looking here, I'll move a little bit out of the way. But when you look at the channel here, the sediment is relatively uniform in size in the gravel range with some sand and a little bit of cobble. So that part's looking okay. There's wood material scattered around, some stream wood. But the thing that's particularly striking is just how uniform it is. If we look at this bank right along here, and I'm sorry, it's hard for me to put my finger right along it, but yeah, so sort of that bank there, that is just almost a sheer vertical entrenchment, and it's very possible that there's some human-induced controls on that. It's hard to say for sure. The quarter here is so narrow, but you can see that the channel is cross-section along here is very, very uniform. So there's no real width undulations that's taking place here. They're really, really minor compared to other settings. So the regional classification has this as uniform. Visually it definitely makes sense that the width is fairly uniform. When I look at the bed, just looking at the water surface at this low flow, there's very little difference. Maybe there's some pools that I can't see, but the bed undulation, at least where I'm standing, is a little different. Now, I may or may not be exactly at the site that was measured, so looking a little bit downstream, and I can't turn the camera because there's a big tree blocking my view, and there's poor accessibility into the creek. But there are pools that are scattered around, so I certainly believe the number, but it's one of those places where the data could kind of go either way as to whether it's a pool riffle or a uniform, more plain bed setting. Of course, when you have a channel that could go either way, you start to ask the question, well, what's the point of doing a classification then in the first place? But the classification gives you a broad sense of the kind of the channel and what kinds of processes, what kinds of ecological functions are there. So there can be differences in what you would want to achieve in a uniform channel versus a pool riffle. So anyway, those are some of the contexts. You know, the site is obviously somewhat impacted by the entrenchment and the human activities that drove that historically, but the classification as a whole makes sense to me. And so this is Arroyo Grande Creek.